Everyone in the police department feared the dog they called Dagger, a once legendary K9 who had become so violent and unstable that no one dared step within 10 feet of him. 3 handlers had been injured. 2 officers quit the unit entirely. Every attempt to retrain him ended in chaos. The chief finally admitted the truth no one wanted to say out loud. Dagger was broken, and he might never recover. Everyone agreed. Dagger was untrainable, dangerous, a ticking time bomb. So, when a military veteran named Hank Lawson walked into the dusty training yard, wearing a torn flannel shirt, a calm expression, and carrying a past he never talked about, the officers whispered in disbelief. And when Dagger charged the fence, teeth bared, ready to attack, Hank did something no trainer had ever done. Hank didn't flinch. He didn't step back. He didn't even blink. He simply said 4 quiet words that silenced the entire yard. "I know that fear." What happened next shocked every single person watching. Before we start, make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe. And really, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. Dust swirled across the training yard as the sun beat down on the old wooden fences. The men standing there weren't rookies. They were seasoned officers, men who had worked with dozens of K9s. But today, not one of them dared to step inside the enclosure. Their eyes remained fixed on the snarling German shepherd pacing back and forth like a coiled storm. His name was Dagger, and the mere mention of it made even the bravest officers swallow hard. He wasn't just aggressive. He was unpredictable, untrusting, and fueled by a rage no one could understand. Dagger's paws kicked up red dust as he lunged at the fence, teeth flashing, muscles rippling with raw power. Every few seconds, he'd let out a growl that sounded less like a dog and more like something broken inside him. 3 handlers had tried to train him. 3 had ended up in the hospital. 1 left the force entirely. The department needed him back in service. He was fast, brilliant, and capable of tracking anyone through any terrain. But without a handler, he was nothing more than a dangerous, volatile animal waiting for the next mistake to snap. Captain Harris stood with his arms folded, jaw clenched, as he watched the dog pace. "We can't keep doing this," he muttered. "If no one gets through to him soon, he'll have to be retired permanently." The other officers shared uneasy glances. They knew what retired meant. Dagger wasn't just untamable, he was considered a risk to the public. If no handler could control him, the department would have no choice but to put him down. But Harris wasn't ready to give up. "There's still one last option," he said quietly. The team waited, unsure if they even wanted to hear the name. Every officer in the county had already refused. Dagger wasn't just any troubled dog. He behaved like he was reliving a nightmare every second. Something in his past had shattered him, and whatever it was, it kept him locked in a world of his own fear and fury. No conventional training methods worked. No amount of commands, treats, or routines made a difference. He rejected everyone with the same violent intensity. That's when an officer spoke up. "Sir, do we really think he can be saved?" Harris didn't answer immediately. He watched Dagger slam against the fence again, barking at shadows only he could see. There was pain in those eyes, deep, raw, unhealed pain. But there was also something else, a glimmer, a spark, as if, buried under all that rage, a piece of the old Dagger was still desperately trying to survive. Finally, Harris exhaled. "Maybe, but only one man has a chance." The officers were still murmuring among themselves when the dusty gravel path behind them crunched under the weight of slow, steady footsteps. Everyone turned, A man, broad-shouldered, gray-bearded, wearing a faded red flannel shirt, walked toward the enclosure with the calmness of someone who'd seen far worse than an angry K9. His backpack hung loosely off one shoulder, and his boots looked like they had marched through more deserts and storms than any man should endure. Captain Harris straightened. "You actually came," he said, surprise slipping into his voice. Hank Lawson nodded once. No smile, no hesitation, just a quiet, steady focus. "You said you needed help," he replied, his voice gravelly but controlled. "I don't walk away from a call like that." The officers exchanged uneasy glances. Most of them had heard stories about Hank, stories from his military days, stories about missions that never made it into reports, stories about a man who carried more wounds on the inside than the outside. But none of them expected him to show up. As Hank approached the fence, Dagger suddenly froze mid-pace. The growling stopped. His ears shot forward, eyes narrowing as he took in the stranger's presence. Dust settled around his paws. A tense silence fell over the yard. One of the younger officers whispered, "He's never gone quiet like that before." Hank didn't acknowledge the comment. He simply set his backpack down and studied the dog with an expression that made the others uneasy. Not fear, not caution, something deeper, like recognition. Dagger's lip curled. A warning growl rumbled in his chest. The officers instinctively backed up, but Hank stood firm. He didn't raise his hands, didn't shout commands, didn't show dominance. He just watched Dagger, breathing slowly, steadily, as if matching the rhythm of a heartbeat only he could hear. Captain Harris stepped closer. "Before you do anything, I need you to understand something. That dog isn't just aggressive. He's dangerous. He's broken." Hank's eyes didn't move from Dagger. "Broken. Things don't scare me." The officers exchanged looks, some impressed, some worried. Dagger suddenly lunged at the fence, claws digging into the dirt, teeth flashing. The impact shook the wood. Several officers flinched. Hank didn't. He simply exhaled, almost softly. "Easy, boy." Dagger didn't back away, but something flickered in his eyes. A hesitation, a confusion, as if the stranger's voice awakened a memory he buried long ago. Captain Harris studied Hank carefully. "So, what do you think?" Hank finally stepped back, just enough to breathe freely. "I think he's not the only one here with ghosts." And for the first time that day, the officers realized they weren't just watching a trainer meet a dangerous K9. They were watching two wounded soldiers recognize each other. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, Hank was already standing outside Dagger's enclosure. A faint orange glow stretched across the yard, though the shadows still clung to the corners like old memories refusing to fade. The officers gathered behind the fence, some gripping the rails tightly, others whispering prayers under their breath. They had seen too many attempts end in chaos. Dagger saw Hank and instantly stiffened. His fur rose along his spine, his eyes sharpened into a threat. He let out a deep, primal growl that made even the most experienced handlers tense. But Hank didn't move. He simply inhaled and stepped inside the pen. The moment his boot touched the dirt, Dagger exploded, a blur of muscle and fury. Dust shot into the air as the dog charged, claws ripping through the ground. "Hank, get out!" an officer shouted. But Hank didn't run. He didn't even flinch. He kept walking, slow, deliberate, calm. Dagger closed the distance in seconds, teeth bared, fully committed to the attack. But just as he leapt, Hank dropped to one knee, lowering his posture instead of rising with dominance. It happened so fast, the officers froze in disbelief. Dagger skidded, confused by the unexpected movement. Instead of landing on Hank, he crashed into the dirt inches away, sliding past him. Hank remained still, head bowed, shoulders relaxed. "Easy," he whispered, barely audible. Dagger spun around, panting, furious, unsure how to interpret this stranger who refused to react the way every other human had reacted, shouting, commanding, threatening. This man did none of those things. The dog lunged again, but this time Hank extended one slow hand, not toward Dagger, but toward the ground beside him. A non-threatening gesture, a vulnerable gesture. The officers gasped. "Hank, he's going to tear you apart," Captain Harris yelled. But Hank didn't move his hand. Dagger stopped just inches away, snarling. His hot breath hit Hank's wrist. For a heartbeat the world held still. Then Dagger snapped. His teeth clamped onto Hank's forearm. Officers swore. Someone reached for the tranquilizer. Harris shouted for everyone to stand down. Dirt flew as Dagger thrashed, trying to overpower the man who refused to fight back. But Hank didn't scream. He didn't pull away. He didn't hit the dog. He stayed perfectly still, eyes closed, breathing slow. After a few agonizing seconds, Dagger stopped shaking. The pressure of his jaws loosened, not out of trust, but confusion. He backed away, staring at Hank with bewilderment rather than rage. Hank finally opened his eyes and met the dog's glare. Blood trickled from his arm, but his voice remained steady. "You don't scare me, boy," he murmured, "because I've been where you are." And for the first time, Dagger didn't attack again. The officers rushed Hank into the medical cabin beside the training yard, but the veteran waved them off with a quiet firmness. "It's just a bite," he muttered, wrapping his bleeding arm with a strip of cloth torn from his sleeve. Captain Harris stared at him in disbelief. "You call that just a bite?" he snapped. "You should be in a hospital." Hank didn't answer. His eyes weren't on his arm at all. They were fixed on Dagger, who still paced inside the pen, agitated, confused, restless. Something in that dog's eyes had pierced straight through him, deeper than the teeth had. Something dark. Something he recognized. Harris finally sat beside him. "You've seen that look before, haven't you?" Hank exhaled slowly, as if releasing a memory he'd buried for years. "Yeah," he whispered, "I have." The officers fell silent, sensing this wasn't a story Hank had shared in a long time, if ever. "It was during my last deployment," Hank began, staring at the dusty ground. "We were on a routine sweep. Nothing special, nothing dangerous. At least, that's what we thought." His voice drifted, low and distant. "We walked into an ambush. The blast was fast, loud, everything went white." He paused, jaw tightening. "When I came to, my team was scattered, some injured. One, my closest friend, was trapped under debris, and he had a dog with him, a brave K9 who refused to leave his side." Hank swallowed hard. The dog was shaking, terrified, not from the blast, but from watching his handler bleed out. He ran a hand slowly over his beard. "I tried to help. I tried everything, but I was too late." The officers said nothing. Even the wind seemed to fall quiet. Hank continued, voice softer. "That dog never trusted another human again, wouldn't let anyone near him, bit anyone who tried. They called him broken." Hank's eyes drifted toward Dagger. "But he wasn't broken. He was grieving." Harris leaned forward. "You think Dagger is grieving, too?" Hank nodded slowly. "When he bit me, that wasn't hatred. That was fear. That was pain he doesn't know how to carry." The captain frowned. "But how can you be sure?" Hank's voice lowered. "Because it's the same pain I carried when I came home. I shut people out. I attacked anything that got too close. I thought the world was the enemy." He stood, tightening the cloth around his arm. "So, yes." I recognized that look. Hank stepped toward the enclosure, eyes locked on Dagger. "Because it's the same look I saw in the mirror, for years." The afternoon sun dipped low, stretching long shadows across the yard. Dagger lay near the back of the enclosure, muscles tight, ears flicking at every sound like a soldier stuck between worlds. The officers gathered again, though this time their expressions were mixed with worry and curiosity. Hank stood alone at the gate, his arm bandaged but steady. He took a slow breath, then stepped inside. No gear, no leash, no sedatives, just the same quiet presence that unsettled everyone the first day he arrived. Dagger lifted his head the moment Hank entered. His eyes sharpened, narrowing into suspicion. A warning growl rippled from his chest. Dust swirled around his paws as he rose to his feet, tense and ready. Harris whispered, "If he charges again, we pull him out." But Hank raised a hand slightly, not toward Dagger, but toward the officers. A silent request. "Stay back." He took 2 slow steps forward. Dagger barked sharply, tail stiff, body leaning forward as if preparing to attack. Hank didn't respond. He simply knelt down, lowering himself until his shoulders were almost level with the dog's, an act of vulnerability that made the officers cringe. Then Hank did something no handler had ever tried. He turned his back on the dog. Gasps erupted from the sidelines. "He's insane," one officer whispered. "Dagger will kill him." But Hank remained still, facing away, shoulders relaxed. "I'm not here to tame you," he murmured softly, knowing Dagger could hear every word. "I'm here to listen." For a moment, nothing changed. Dagger's growl deepened. His claws scratched against the dirt as he took a step forward. Then another. Hank closed his eyes. He heard the movement, felt the vibrations in the ground. He didn't move. Dagger approached until his breath warmed the back of Hank's neck. The officers tensed, fingers on tranquilizers. Dagger's teeth brushed the fabric of Hank's flannel shirt. One bite, just one, and it would all be over. But Hank whispered again, steady and unafraid. "I know what it's like to expect pain every time someone gets close." Something shifted. The growl stopped. Dagger's breathing slowed, no longer frantic but unsure. He moved to Hank's side, sniffing his injured arm. For the first time his eyes softened, not trust, not affection, but confusion, as if trying to understand why this man wasn't afraid of him. Hank slowly extended a hand to the ground beside him, just like before. This time, Dagger didn't lunge. He sat. The officers froze, jaws falling open. Hank didn't smile. He didn't cheer. He just whispered, "Good boy. You're safe." And for the first time, Dagger believed him. The officers didn't speak for several seconds. No one dared to breathe too loudly. They had just witnessed something they believed impossible. Dagger sitting calmly beside a man who should have terrified him. Hank slowly stood, careful not to make sudden movements, and stepped back toward the fence. Dagger didn't lunge. He didn't growl. He only watched, ears tilted forward, eyes filled with something the officers had never seen before. Curiosity. Captain Harris approached, still stunned. "How did you do that?" he whispered. Hank shook his head. "I didn't do anything. He made the choice." But Harris's expression shifted. There was something he had been holding back, something heavy, something he hadn't shared with any of the previous handlers because none of them stayed long enough to deserve the truth. He motioned Hank toward the office. "There's something you need to know," he said quietly. Inside, Harris closed the door and pulled out a thin, worn folder from the drawer. The edges were frayed, the papers inside creased from years of being handled but never fully understood. He placed it gently on the desk. "This," he said, "is Dagger's real story." Hank opened the folder, expecting medical notes or training reports, but the first page was a photograph. Dagger standing proudly beside a young officer, both covered in mud, both smiling like they had survived the world together. The handler's name was Officer Cole Ramsey. Harris exhaled. Cole was one of our best, and Dagger. He was his heart dog. The two were inseparable. His voice tightened. But during a pursuit 2 years ago, things went bad. A gunman opened fire. Cole shielded Dagger with his body, took the bullet meant for him. Hank closed his eyes, a knot forming in his chest. Dagger tried to drag him to safety, Harris continued, refused to leave him. When officers arrived, Dagger wouldn't let anyone near Cole's body. He attacked every medic, every officer, everyone who touched the scene. They had to sedate him just to reach Cole. The room fell silent. Harris lowered his voice. He saw his handler die protecting him. He never recovered. Every time a new trainer tried to approach, something in him snapped. It wasn't aggression, it was grief and guilt. Hank traced a thumb over the photograph. Cole's gentle smile, Dagger's bright eyes, a bond stronger than duty, stronger than fear. Now broken, Hank whispered, "He's not fighting trainers. He's fighting the memory of losing him." Harris nodded, eyes glistening. "That's why no one could handle him." Hank closed the folder slowly. "No one tried to heal him." Outside the office window, Dagger sat waiting, no longer a monster, no longer a threat, just a wounded soldier wanting someone to understand him. For 2 days, Hank worked with Dagger in small, quiet sessions, no commands, no expectations, no pressure, just presence, just patience. Sometimes he sat inside the enclosure in silence for an hour, letting the dog circle him, sniff him, study him. Other times he walked the fence slowly, letting Dagger mirror his footsteps. It wasn't training, it was healing. And slowly, the officers began to notice something incredible. Dagger stopped growling when Hank approached. He no longer lunged at shadows. He watched Hank with cautious eyes, but eyes no longer filled with rage, only uncertainty. By the 3rd morning, Captain Harris made a decision. "It's time," he said. "We run the evaluation." The officers tensed. This wasn't a simple test. It was the one that determined whether Dagger would return to duty or be retired forever. The evaluation grounds were set up like a real emergency scenario: noise, distractions, moving targets, and a volunteer acting as a fleeing suspect. The kind of situation that had triggered Dagger's worst trauma before. The officers loaded tranquilizers, preparing for the worst. Harris glanced at Hank. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. "If he breaks, he could hurt you." Hank stepped forward without hesitation. "I'm not leaving him alone this time." The gate opened. Dagger trotted beside Hank, ears alert, tail low. His muscles were tense, but he wasn't panicking. Yet, a loud bang erupted, one of the simulation devices meant to mimic a gunshot. Dagger froze. His chest tightened, his ears pinned back. Memories slammed into him like a storm. He whined, a sound so broken the officers had never heard it from him before. Hank knelt beside him. "I'm here," he whispered. "You're not losing anyone today." The volunteer suspect burst from behind a barrier, sprinting across the field. Dagger's instincts flared. Fear mixed with training, confusion mixed with memory. He looked between the suspect and Hank, trembling. Hank didn't shout commands. He didn't force a decision. He placed a steady hand on Dagger's chest. "Choose courage," he whispered. Dagger's breathing slowed, his eyes sharpened, not with fear, but with purpose. He turned toward the suspect, stance shifting. For the first time in 2 years, Dagger moved without hesitation. He bolted, but this time he wasn't acting out of panic. He wasn't reliving a nightmare. He was following a handler he trusted. Within seconds, Dagger executed a perfect controlled takedown, clean, precise, by the book. The officers erupted in stunned silence. Hank approached, pride shining in his eyes. Dagger released the suspect on command, then did something no one expected. He pressed his head against Hank's chest, seeking comfort, not approval. And in that single moment, everyone knew Dagger had finally come back. The training yard felt different that afternoon. The air seemed lighter, the officers less tense, the silence no longer heavy with fear. Dagger walked beside Hank, not perfectly heeled to command, but with a calmness no one had seen since the day his original handler died. Every officer watched the pair with speechless disbelief. Some smiled, others wiped tears they pretended were dust. Captain Harris approached slowly, almost afraid that a sudden movement would shatter the miracle happening before their eyes. He stopped a few steps away. "Hank, what you did today?" His voice cracked, the weight of years lifting from his shoulders. "You saved him." Hank shook his head. "No," he replied gently. "He saved himself. I just showed him he wasn't alone." Before Harris could respond, Dagger nudged Hank's hand, tail swaying in a cautious, gentle rhythm. Nothing like the frantic aggression he once showed. It was trust. Fragile, newborn trust. Harris cleared his throat, emotions thickening his words. "There's something else, Hank, something the department has been considering." Hank raised a brow. "We want you to stay, permanently." Hank blinked, genuinely surprised. "As what? A trainer?" Harris nodded. "Not just any trainer, the official K9 rehabilitation specialist. Dogs like Dagger, they don't need commands. They need someone who understands their wounds." His voice softened. "Someone like you." The yard fell silent, waiting. Hank looked down at Dagger, who gazed back with steady, devoted eyes that no longer carried fire and terror, but a quiet loyalty, a loyalty reborn. "Only if he stays with me," Hank said. Gasps rippled across the yard. "You want him as your partner?" Harris asked. Hank knelt beside Dagger, brushing a hand through the dog's fur. "He chose me today, and I'm not letting him lose another handler." Dagger leaned into him. No hesitation, no fear. The decision was instant. Captain Harris smiled. "Then he's yours." The officers broke into applause, real, heartfelt applause. It wasn't just a celebration of a dog being saved. It was the return of a legend, the healing of 2 soldiers who had walked through different wars, but shared the same scars. Hank rose to his feet, Dagger pressed against his leg. As the sun dipped behind the training yard, casting golden light over them both, Hank whispered, "Come on, partner. Let's go home." And for the first time in years, Dagger walked beside a handler, not because he was ordered to, but because he wanted to.